What is up, fellow thermonuclear AFers? I am Dan Pavali coming at you with my certified fantabulous co-host, Mr. Grant Hughes. It's time to do NBA offseason chaos rankings. There's a finals game being played today, game one. If you're listening to this on the Thursday when it drops, we will not be talking about that because one, it hasn't happened yet, and two, it hasn't happened yet. So how about that? This seemed like a fun exercise. We've already did it, but we refreshed some things. Just this summer feels like it's going to be wild because of how much more punitive the luxury tax apron implementations are going to be. And there's just a lot of teams. I think it's always this way in the offseason, but there's just this various scenarios of, wow, shit could go sideways almost anywhere, or there's a lot of big moves or transactional overhaul that's going to be done. And that's kind of how we framed this, is like we're looking at, there aren't too many coaching vacancies anymore, but it's the stability of your core. Could there be mega trades? Are you trying to angle yourself for big free agent signings or trade acquisitions? And that's mostly what we mean by chaos, is it's transactional bedlam or overhaul or drama, of course, where there's the extracurricular, emotional, off-court things. Grant, though, I think the first question we need to go to is, how the heck are you doing?
I'm doing very well. I'm excited to discuss some chaos. Also, like, full disclosure, we put these lists together like several weeks ago. And this, I think
how long have we been trying to record this, by the way?
It's been a while. It might be like a month. It's possible it's been a month. So we'll go through it, but I'm curious to see like how much do I remember? Always an iffy bet, like of why I thought X, Y, and Z a month ago about these teams' chaos rankings, and two, like I don't know how much getting out of the heat of the moment for some of them, whether we're talking about like a playoff elimination or like a contract situation or something like that. How far removed from that can we be now, and how much is that going to change?
And we did separate them into 5 different tiers, and they're ranked within tiers. But as you said, when we were actually going through the initial exercise, if you want to actually quibble, or, if tier 1 is DEFCON 1, so that's the teams that have the most chaos potential. If you want to quibble over the order within a tier, the idea is that if you're in the same tier, yes, we gave you a ranking, but you're so close together that all those teams are basically interchangeable. If you think a team that's in tier 1 belongs in tier 3, tier 4, tier 2, whatever, that becomes a more dynamic or meaningful discussion, is the way that we kind of viewed it, is because you need to split hairs with the actual rankings. But if you're in the same team, the concept is just that you're well within the chaos meter of everyone else that's in that tier.
And especially since, like, by the way, the criteria for this we made up and are fuzzy. So like, yeah, there's room for
super
debate.
Scientific. There was an algorithm.
Sorry, right. Yeah, we commissioned several studies and a lot of the top physicists in the country, because as the number one media property in the universe, we have the resources to commission a lot of pre-podcast study for stuff like this. But yeah, well, I guess, like, I mean, obviously it's a springboard for discussion. It's a device, it's a gimmick, but also, like, it is a good way to frame the offseason from the perspective of, like, where are like potential flare-up spots, I guess. Maybe that's, and where aren't they? I think maybe that's the way to look at it.
And we'll begin in tier 5. I'll throw it up on the screen in a moment. The tiers where it's just like lower stakes, like, not that we're going to blow through those. Like, it's just like, they're just teams that aren't built to have drama. And by the way, that's a good thing. You don't want to necessarily rent. There's an element of, if it's because you have so much cap space or you could acquire player X, that's like kind of embraceable chaos, but you don't want to necessarily be in tier 1. And so if you're annoyed that your team isn't higher, like if you're a Charlotte Hornets fan, like, there's a lot of drama that could unfold. I don't really know why you're arguing in favor of that. Like, you shouldn't be crossing your fingers for that type of drama.
I mean, and also it is the type of thing where in a lot of cases, being in the 5th or 4th tier is like, even if there is drama, it's kind of low stakes based on where that team is in its, organizational trajectory. Not in every case, because as we'll see here, there's at least one very good team. Actually, there's a lot of very good teams in tier 5. So it's not always low stakes, but that's the case for like quite a few of these ones.
We are off to the races. We begin with tier 5. Do you want to take us through this one, or the team that is like has the least amount of chaos pending?
Yeah, so we have it again. These are all fairly interchangeable, but I guess the number 30, if you were ranking it that way, or the lowest team in tier 5 is the Washington Wizards. Just mainly because, like, Bert does not like us putting Washington 30th. You hear him whining?
Good for him. Is he like
He's
that
he's a
conflicted
big
on what they're going to do at number 2? Is
he's
that
a
what it
big
is?
Jordan Poole guy.
Yeah.
So I think he's just really upset about it. So it's just like, this is a what are the stakes situation. Like there's not a ton that is gonna like, bring about a lot of upheaval to Washington. There, Tyus Jones free agency. Are they going to trade Kuzma? That kind of thing. So let's just lump, 2 or 3 more in here. So you got Charlotte and you got Toronto that are also in that chunk.
Yeah, the one here, so Charlotte we have is number 29. And I'll say there does seem like that's a swing team to where we could look back on it, because if people really think that they're going to entertain, I don't really care about Miles Bridges free agency or sign and trade scenarios. They lose him, whatever. But like if they decide to trade LaMelo Ball,
Sure.
not that I feel like it's been more speculative than any
Mhm.
like real organizational rumor, but that's a team you look at and go, okay, they could end up higher on the chaos rankings. The way they've operated basically since the ownership change, there's nothing that would make me think they're going to kind of author that type of bedlam on purpose. First of all, I don't think you need to. I know he's been injured and his max kicks in. I wouldn't trade LaMelo Ball unless they know something we don't.
I think like in a lot of cases, you would say new ownership, new front office, new coach, like chaos, right? But it feels to me like that's all done now. And it's almost like, I think they're going to want to see like, what does this year look like? And maybe we reassess as a new like management group after the fact, what needs to happen here. And again, like pretty low stakes. Like I don't feel like the Hornets are viewed as like a hyper competitive, team. They're rebuilding, right?
Yeah, and Toronto even there's not really much swing there. I guess if they decided to operate with cap space, because like what are they doing on the free agent market? What is the trade that you're like the way Masai Ujiri was talking after the season? He's kind of open to anything, but doesn't really foresee anything seismic happening at least for this year. So it's
pick a direction.
Yeah, well, they kind of have a direction, but like they need to get a feel for like this new core of like, well, let's get a bigger sample with Barrett and Pirtle and Emmanuel Quickly and Scotty Barnes. And then it's okay. There's Bruce Brown's free agency. But like they're not the way that they inject chaos is do they all of a sudden, it's not even through, do they make a blockbuster trade that their timeline suggests they have no business doing? And the answer to that for me is no, they won't do that.
No. So big pivot here. The next 2 teams are Boston and Dallas, who you might recognize in the finals playing against each other. That's kind of why they're here. A lot of it is like just by virtue of the fact that your team was good enough to make it this far. And there are no, with the exception of Derek Jones Jr.'s free agency in Dallas, there's no looming like, oh my God, we're going to lose this guy, or this guy is going to ask out, or, there's just not, when you're this good, continuity kind of tends to take care of itself. And both of their contract and payroll situations suggest that like they could all just be back fully intact next year. Like there's just not, I don't know what the major changes or upheaval would even be for either of these teams.
And it would be, and this is coming from someone who I always have to add that clarifier, who was not supportive of the way that the Mavs handled their business at the trade deadline and was clearly wrong. Like, what is even the impetus for any of if anyone comes out of this saying like, oh, the Celtics need to trade Derek White or Jaylen Brown because they lost in the finals? It's like STFU at that point, because you're like getting to the finals is maybe it's not the caps lock success you wanted, but I would say if you wanted to frame anything as or bust, it was getting to the finals or bust for them, just based off how I'll say favorable their path looked when you factor in injuries to other teams. And it's even if you think about the things that could go sideways and you sort of laid them out, Derek Jones Jr. is not irreplaceable. And it's the Mavs they might have access to the full non-taxpayer mid-level. And if they don't, like you could probably give 2 seconds to Detroit and say, take on Tim Hardaway Jr.'s salary. And now we can give $12+ million a year to Derek Jones Jr. if you need it. And then with Boston, I'm just casting aside any possibility that they would consider trading any of their core 6 because they lost in the finals.
Right. Like to a generational superstar, like Boston could lose, right? Like I picked them in 7. So inherent in that is like, yeah, they could lose. That's not kicking ass throughout the regular season and the playoffs and then losing to a guy who maybe 5 years from now we say is like, wow, he won 4 MVPs in a row. Like that is not a recipe for a change.
And even probably the biggest thing for them is if Derek White doesn't sign an extension, because they will offer it, that injects some uncertainty moving forward. But hey, he's still on your roster for next season. And so this offseason, they're not going to move him the way that they could. And it's less likely to begin with, but like if they wanted to attach first round equity to Peyton Pritchard, and it's like, okay, who's the best player we could get? That's like, well, obviously they have to be cheap, but it's like they have the ability to make another difference making addition if they don't care about their payroll. But that's like a pleasant form of chaos. And so I just don't know. We did have Dallas way higher when we first did this exercise. It was before, I think it was, they were in the second round. And I don't think either of us had them getting in the second round, out of the second round, excuse me.
Yeah.
But I don't know that there's a case for either of these two teams to be higher than this.
Yeah.
Right now.
No, I don't think so. And because a lot of I feel like the implication of a chaos ranking is like things could go bad. And like, there's just the downside's not really, it doesn't seem there.
And by the way, they're only not like 30 and 29 because like the spots that they're in come with expectations.
Sure.
So it's like there is like, would you rule out the possibility that Dallas, instead of dumping Tim Hardaway Jr. to keep Derrick Jones, is like, we're going to attach first round picks to Tim Hardaway Jr. and see who that could get us?
Yeah.
It's like there's that possibility being on the table.
Yeah. The next team we have is Portland, which is just much more in line with Washington, Charlotte, to a lesser extent, Toronto, I think.
They're like, they're interesting from the perspective of they have players that other teams should want, including RW3, Jeremy Grant, Malcolm Brogdon, Anthony Simons. We were trying to get him to Orlando for like 18 months at this point, I feel like. But they're in this weird spot where they have 15 guaranteed contracts on the books for next season as of this moment. And they're inside the luxury tax. And it's when you're factoring in first round picks, by the way, and they're just in the luxury tax. And that's not going to stand. And so it does feel like there's going to be, I wouldn't call it a fire sale bag, but like there's going to be upheaval here. So they are a team that I feel like you could justify putting in a higher tier, but they're in the infancy of this rebuild that it's such like, what would they do? Like, even if they traded Jeremy Grant and RW3 and Malcolm Brogdon, like, what is that actually chaotic? I wouldn't expect them to do that, by the way, but is that even actually chaotic?
All right. So again, another pivot back. I'm tempted to flip the order of this, but we can just discuss it. So we have the Thunder next, which is much more in line with your Bostons and your Dallases. Maybe people would take issue with this one just because this is a number one seed that is young and getting better and has cap space. And it's really tempting to think of lots of fake trades for this team. And I think the assumption is they will make an addition, probably, right? Like the Giddey spot is just there sitting, hoping to be upgraded. They have all those picks. I keep thinking about ways to get Lauri Markkanen on this team. But so is that chaos though, right? Like it's like things could either stay the same, which is very good, or get a lot better. That doesn't feel like the same thing a lot of these other teams are going to face.
I do think if you told me right now that they're going to acquire Lauri Markkanen, they need to shoot up these rankings, because I think what people, and I'm not calling out any one or outlet specifically. I'm not saying you're not thinking, I know you're not thinking about it this way because we've talked about it. What people don't realize is, okay, it'd be really cool if they just went out and made the big time acquisition, but to use Lauri Markkanen as an example, he's going to cost near max money to retain after next season. So when you have Shea, who's about to go on a supermax, and then when you have Chet and J-Dub, they're eventually going to be on maxes of their own. This is just not yes, I would love for them. Yeah, we'll pay 4 max guys. We don't care. But like, they're not going to do that. So to be realistic, if you want them to go the fireworks route, it needs to be the right mix of, well, this player is cost controlled and their salary. Yeah, it's more expensive than Josh Giddey, or it's more expensive. Way more. Joe's making like $2 million as a team option, but like their salary is so far below the max that they can be on this roster beyond next season and not hamstring us. And so like, that's why everyone, well, not everyone, but we talked a lot about Denny Avdia for this team would make a lot of sense. The other one that I thought about too is just like, what if you did Josh Giddey and one of your like 2025 firsts for Kyle Kuzma, who's like, because I just don't see Washington trading Avdia. And like Kyle Kuzma will give you some rebounding if you're playing him at a wing spot. He'll give you some additional scoring. Is the shooting good enough to hold up off the ball? I think as a positional defender, he'll be fine. And like his salary declines. That's the type of opportunity you want to see. The only other, and I'm curious to see if you have another name that was bringing to mind, where if it was this mega big name or semi big name that they could go after that would make sense based off their pay grade, is kind of Mikal Bridges. But even that is like, all right, he's got 2 years left. And then he might be, maybe he extends off his current number. I think it's possible. He's certainly more likely to extend than OG Anunoby opting in and extending. That's for sure. But like, it feels like and that's assuming the Nets would even move him. Like that's kind of the ceiling for me on how splashy they would get. And there, look, by the way, we could look back on this offseason, and the most glitzy thing that they do is, well, we declined Isaiah Joe's team option and gave him that raise 1 year early because he'll let us save money down the line. It's also, let's pay him while while we're not up against it with all these other dudes on maxes.
Yeah. I definitely, I understand the reality of the rising cost of this team once all of the core young guys come due for big money, and SGA, as you said, has already got it and is going to get more. I'm kind of coming around to this theory of like, don't all those extra picks just give you the tools to dig out of any salary bind you put yourself in? So like, I'm almost getting to like a fuck it attitude of like, Cat, sure. Andrew Wiggins, why not? Like everyone's an upgrade over Giddey, and you have the means to like, yeah, float it this year. You need to get off money. Like nobody's better equipped to get off money than the Thunder. They have all these pick sweeteners they could just use to, and like you can't use all these picks. Like you just can't keep adding 2 and 3 first round rookies and their salaries, which need to be extended eventually every year. So like I'm kind of getting to the idea of like maybe the real use of all these picks is you can make some quote unquote like dumb or risky decisions and then do it for a year or two and then get out of it. It's not the same as like, just take Minnesota can't trade, a bunch of first to get off Cat. If it came to that, the Thunder could, if like they're going to have the means to do a lot of stuff that other teams can't. So I'm much more willing to entertain the idea of OKC just adding anybody that's like crazy expensive and like, oh my God, this payroll is going to be $200 million in 26, 27 or whatever. Okay. They can get out of it. Fine. You have to take your shots now, right? They're good enough. They were the number 1 seed. The window doesn't stay open. Just do it now and see what happens and get out of it.
You could also look at it, and you saying, I hadn't thought of it this way, is you're assuming that the player you acquire becomes like this downtrodden asset. What if it's just Larry Martin as an example? He's not going to be immovable on his next deal. And so if the worst case scenario might actually be, well, we consolidate a bunch of our assets now into this guy. We know we can't keep these 4 together long term, but we'll just trade one of the 4 and get back a bunch of other first round picks and keep it rolling. Keep it rolling that way.
And let's try to win the title next year. Like we're pretty close. We were the number 1 seed. Like just I think like it's we always talk about windows, and it's just like, make the window now. You can, and it's not going to like ruin you down the road. This isn't a situation where they're not going to be in Phoenix's place ever, just because you almost can't trade away all your draft equity. They have so much. So it's just, they have so many outs. Maybe that's it. Like I guess they could really change things, but like they can just get back to square one so easily if they need to.
I think it'll be, and by the way, we didn't mention their exact number of cap space, but like assuming they're just going to renounce Gordon Hayward's hold, and I don't know why they wouldn't at this point. Like you're looking at over $30 million in spending power, which is for the number 1 seed in the Western. Like so many things are on the table, and I think that would be the justification for putting them higher. Is you could say it's a good thing of chaos, but like they could even, and I don't know if this is negative or good, but like the Josh Giddey conversation needs to be had. He's extension eligible. A lot of the problems in the playoffs that we all knew were going to come to bear, guess what? They came to bear, and so like the most Thunder thing ever would be flipping him for more draft equity. It's just like
if that happens, we have to start wondering like, is there like what really is going on here? Or does Sam Presti know that like
that's addition by subtraction when you're looking at your postseason stock? It's just more Taysom Wallace, more Isaiah Joe. Yeah, if you want them to get a big, I kind of get it. So like I wouldn't. It'd be different if it was like if they flipped Case and Wallace. Yeah, like we're gonna get some more draft picks for Case and Wallace now.
The last team here is San Antonio. It's just much more in line with the other bottom of the standings teams we've covered so far. Like what they need a point guard, they'll probably get a point guard, and then it's still just the grace period is long. Like they got a couple years, I think most people would agree, before there's any like real urgency. There's more than there would be otherwise with a second year player because Wembanyama is so good already, but like I don't know what it's like such a stable organization. Popovich is under contract forever again. Like it just, I don't know what the chaos would look like here.
I'm honestly wondering why we had them in front of the Thunder. They're in the same tier, so it doesn't matter, but you really have to believe that. And I mean, he is this good, but do they have to go out and trade for Darius Garland or Trae Young or Donovan Mitchell? No, they don't. And their track record and their approach to rebuilding suggests that unless their hand is forced, they won't do anything
Yeah.
nuclear. And so they could probably be moved down like below the Blazers, I would think. If you
Yeah,
really
I
want
mean,
to.
for sure, we could move them down as far as you want. Again, the tier, it goes back to the like they're in this tier, like whatever. Yeah, you could definitely put them. You could put them 30th if you wanted, just because Wembanyama's gives them such a firm like foundation. So, yeah. But now we
I
move
do
on.
hope they get a point guard. Like it's Trey
Well,
Jones
of
is the
course.
case good that they were starting him, but like at least go sign Tyus Jones or
Mhm.
something.
Yeah. No, of course. Like that's not chaos. That's like a universally recognized need that
Well,
they have the means to
chaos
address.
would be because people have framed it this way, and I disagree. But they try to play the whole, Victor Wembanyama is such a competitive psychopath. Like he's gonna force the Spurs' hand. It's like, no, he's fucking not. Like
No.
this never happens. Like let's stop with this. Like I know
Mhm.
that he's very polarizing as an actual player, but this dude is not gonna be like, yeah, you need to get me talent right now, or else what, buddy? What?
Yeah.
And I'm not impugning Victor Wembanyama's character. I'm dismissing the idea that he's going to apply pressure to the Spurs leading into the second season of his
I
NBA
think
career.
you're celebrating his character and maturity because he's not going to do that. Like that.
The pressure is just it's intrinsic. It's
Yeah.
okay. We have a superstar right now who might be a top 10 player next season.
Mhm.
That's the Victor Wembanyama. It's unspoken pressure.
Right. Right. Yeah. Tier 4, we've moved up or down. I guess this is all very confusing. There's more chaos here. The first team is the Brooklyn Nets. Mikal Bridges trade hypotheticals. They've seem like a team that wants to get better now. Part of that's because they can't tank because there's no payoff for it. I don't know. They could have been a tier 5, I guess, other than the fact that like I think Bridges is a hot name on the trade market, and that's kind of I don't know. I guess that's the reason we put him here. Honestly, I can't remember what else. Do you remember like what the other thoughts were with Brooklyn here?
Well, it seems like there's I don't know if it's a disconnect organizationally, but there's definitely you have Joe Tsai coming out and saying we're taking the long-term approach. And then General Manager Sean Marks is kind of talking about not accelerating the timeline, but he doesn't sound like someone who's preparing to undergo another rebuild.
Mhm.
They don't control their own first round pick until 2028. And so are they going to consolidate some of the draft equity they got from Phoenix and Philly and Dallas into a star of their own? Are they going to slow play this and like, yeah, Dennis Schroeder and Nick Claxton and Mikal Bridges, let's run it back, and Cam Johnson? Do they strike a middle ground? And what does the middle ground look like? I said the middle ground is trading for DeJounte Murray. Like that's just the middle ground. Is him and Mikal Bridges, I don't even think get you to the playoffs, but you keep yourself flexible. It does seem like they're prioritizing as of right now, like they could get to close to $70 million in cap space in 2025. So it does seem like they're prioritizing that route. But because they're not good, like there's just if you stay the same or kind of futz and fiddle on the margins, if someone comes in and bowls you over with an offer for Mikal Bridges, that's where the chaos sets in. And I know a lot of people use the rumor that they didn't take their own picks and Jalen Green in a deal from the Rockets. Here's my thought process on that. Jalen Green was playing pretty poorly at the time that offer was made, and we haven't in true, reporter fashion. Like we didn't hammer down how many first round picks they were getting back of their own. If it was like 2, it's just like, okay, Jalen Green and 2 first round picks, that doesn't move the needle for me. And so if you have a team like Indiana coming in with an offer of Jarris Walker, Benedict Mathurin, TJ McConnell, 2 firsts on top of that, and maybe some swaps, maybe some seconds, like there are offers, I think, teams out there that could force them to think, and just given they just feel stuck in place for this season specifically. So I get the impetus for putting them this high, but there's probably a chance based off just the way that their draft obligations unfold, that if there is chaos, it's probably because they went we're going to strike a blockbuster trade of our own rather than, we traded Mikal Bridges and let Nick Claxton walk and so.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like Brooklyn's like spectrum of possibilities is like 33 wins to like 44 wins. And it's kind of like, how chaotic can it really get? I guess, if there's a big trade, maybe that changes, but I'm going to give you 3 in a row to just put up here. And then we can kind of pick and choose where we want to go here. So the next 3 in order for us are Utah, Memphis, and Chicago. And we can start talking. I'll start talking about Utah here because we kind of hit on it a little bit with OKC. You've got the Markkanen situation, extension eligible, 1 more year on that deal, a pretty sought after trade candidate, but also is like not so beyond Utah's timeline, which by the way is kind of like set around Keontae George and Taylor Hendricks and Kessler, who aren't like oh, these are definite cornerstones. Like we hope so. So like there's justifications for trading Markkanen. There's certainly justifications for extending him. That's really like the core issue for them. Because they're in control of all of it, it's, if things get chaotic, it's almost like quote unquote chaotic. It's because Utah just made a decision. It's not like they're being forced into doing anything.
Yeah, and so they could have over $30 million in cap space, but that assumes they don't renegotiate and extend more. I'm assuming he won't sign an extension, like the 140% raise off of what is he making, 18 million next year is just no, he'll get more than that if like a lot more if he waits. But they have the cap space to just be like, we'll give you your max right now, which would be 42.3 million. So you let that kick in a year earlier, and then it also kind of shortens the total length of the deal. I think he probably becomes just as valuable. I don't know if he's more valuable at that number, but if you have him on a multi-year max, let's say like an additional 2 or 3 years, that's like teams would still trade for that if you decide to pivot. But there's also been the rumblings that come out that say the Jazz are looking to go big game hunting, and it's like that seems far-fetched, but then it's, well, they've had to go and lean into these midseason tanks because they're always, and it was more egregious in 22, 23, whereas they were too good at one point. This year, they were still they had that run in, what was that, January or February?
Yeah.
And so you're never going to have this primo draft pick unless you do trade Markkanen and tear it down from there. So if you're keeping him, I might actually understand the theory of, well, we'll just pay him next summer. We're going to try and use this cap space and draft picks to actually go big game hunting. But like, what is the guy? Like, they're a team that could make some, it does make some sense, but like a lot of the players that seem like they're going to be available, one of them is Donovan Mitchell. It could be, and like, you're not going that route. And then so are you going to get Darius Garland and you're positive that he's a better cornerstone moving forward than Keontae George? Like, he's enough of an upgrade in the moment, but like he's already on his max deal. So it's like, what is the player that moves you to actually act now? Excuse me.
Memphis thoughts? It's just, to me, I kind of look at the Grizzlies and say, they're sort of just like last year didn't happen. And we're just going to assume the team we had, plus the young guys that emerged amid all those injuries this past season, make us better. Like, I don't see that you're not going to go flip Marcus Smart necessarily. I think some people might want that to happen, but I think Memphis just seems like a team. They're kind of right in the middle, lower end of the middle, I guess, if we're really counting carefully. I just don't see, like, where do the big changes come, if any, right? Like, I guess you might trade, you might make a small upgrade. You might package up like Santi Aldama and Zaire Williams and try to find a center or something. But it's like the core of this team, Morant, Bane, Jackson, and then you've got Gigi Jackson like coming down the pipeline. Like, I just feel like that's not going to go anywhere.
No, I guess if they wanted to kind of get involved for, Karl-Anthony Towns or Jared Allen, if they become available, that's where the chaos comes from. The bigger thing for me, because I don't expect them to go big game hunting, even though they could, would be they kind of enter as I don't think they're going to be a team that pays the tax. And so it's, well, how do they get out of that? Are they just getting rid of Luke Kennard on the team option? Are they kind of dumping salaries when you look at Zaire Williams specifically? Do they look at a Brandon Clark type deal? And if you're doing that, well, what does that do to your big man rotation? So it's interesting that we had them this high. I think it's just because they could, in theory, if they wanted to make a bigger move, especially for a big man or a wing, like they have the assets to do so. And I think, yes, last season didn't happen. So if we're saying that, like, well, then the pressure's on. Like, your roster's getting more expensive. We're talking about tax concerns now. So there does feel like there's an undercurrent of potential for something big could happen here. I wouldn't predict it or bank on it.
And framed that way, I wonder if we have the Bulls. I mean, again, the same tier, so who cares? The Bulls just don't. I mean, there's the DeRozan free agency. There's a hypothetical Zach LaVine trade, maybe. But this team we know what this team cares about. We know what it does. There's already rumors of DeRozan re-signing for a pretty high dollar 2-year deal. I just don't think the Bulls are wired to like make big swings of the kind that would warrant a higher chaos ranking.
I'm with you for the most part, but there is a report from Casey Johnson that they've now significantly lowered their asking price on LaVine. And so getting rid of him does throw a level.
I wonder why.
Yeah, coming off another season-ending injury and owed $138 million over the next 3 years. But even just entertaining that, it does make you wonder if there will be an organizational shift in mindset. And like, some of this stuff is out of their control. Like, DeMar DeRozan could just leave. I don't know the team, like, does Philly decide to burn some of its cap space if it strikes out elsewhere on him? And he's like, oh, I could play for a team that actually has stakes. Yeah, I'll go there and do that for a little bit. And then there's Patrick Williams's free agency, and it's, does a team come over the top with an offer sheet that the Bulls won't match, and then you've all of a sudden lost this solid defender who's shown some flashes on offense for nothing, or you end up overpaying him, and that throws you into a weird chaos. I actually could see the potential for them to be higher too if they actually embrace a rebuild, which makes me think they're probably right where they need to be. And finally, let's not discount, like, could you completely discount the possibility that they just go the opposite route and we see the Bulls like trading a first round pick to get talent now just to maintain that nice little even keel in the race for 7 to 11?
Yes, but also, like, if that happens, is that really chaos, or is that us just sitting back and nodding like Bulls gonna Bulls? Like, that's just
chaos. Is the Bulls is that's like the Bulls' brand is treadmill chaos. It's like they are maddeningly in place. Like that's running in place.
These next two teams are interesting. We could put them up together. I think the last two in this tier, the Orlando Magic and the Indiana Pacers, round out our tier 4. I guess like kind of similar, except I mean, in that they're kind of up and coming, youngish Eastern Conference teams. The Magic stand out though in that like their flexibility resources are just greater than the Pacers. I guess like, well, of these two, I know we ranked them, so I guess we by definition we're saying the Pacers have a slightly higher potential for chaos, drama, whatever. Which would you expect to have like the splashier, like more unpredictable offseason out of these two?
I think it's just because the Pacers kind of made their splash with the addition of Siakam that it has to be the Magic. Just I've called it when I've written about it, I call it choose your own adventure cap space. Just because they have like, oh, we could guarantee Jonathan Isaac, we could pick up team options on Ingles and Mo Wagner, or we could just maximize our cap space to the hilt. So the fact that they could, in theory, I framed it this way: you keep Wagner, you keep Isaac, you keep Gary Harris, and then you're still sitting on like 25 plus million in cap space. Like that's going to be super useful in trades and free agency. And we've seen them now. Okay, they're in the playoffs. The expectations come with it, and they have two very distinct needs that are easier to fill than you look at Indiana's very distinct needs, which is like, we just need another upgrade on the wing, which how many teams are kind of left searching for that? And Orlando, it's more like, well, we could use a game manager and we just need more shooting. And there seem, as of right now, the market, both in terms of free agency and trades, feels like it's going to bear more of those options than the Mikal Bridges types. Go figure.
Yeah, I think, I guess for me, I don't know. I keep circling back to this idea of like, well, what the opposite of chaos is like in some ways control. And Orlando just has like a pretty significant measure of control over like what changes happen. Indiana's slightly less so, just because like the Siakam thing, like, yeah, they can offer the most of any team. They can offer the 5th year. It's still like, I don't know, like there's probably not any drama there, but that is a different situation than Orlando is in, because Orlando doesn't have someone that's like, oh my God, we got to make sure he's back. It's who do we add and how? But we have all these different ways to change things for the better. Whereas Indiana just has that slightly different element of, at least some of it's out of their control, because Siakam is just a free agent and like, who knows? So I think that to me justifies Indiana being just a smidge higher.
And also now you're in a position where, let's not forget, Obi Toppin is a restricted free agent, but like when you're inching towards the tax more, his pay grade's going to matter. And then now you've created this scenario, and if Pacers fans are listening, they're always in our YouTube mentions saying that Benedict Mathurin's the next Anthony Edwards or something. Not all of you, but that is feedback that we've gotten. You now reach the conference finals without Benedict Mathurin or Jarris Walker as critical parts of your rotation. You could argue that Benedict Mathurin would have been a critical part of the rotation had he not suffered that right shoulder injury. But like when you look at the makeup of the roster now, it has more of a need for the defensive versatility or verve that you're going to get from Andrew Nembhard and Ben Shepherd than Benedict Mathurin, who, yes, we've seen him have really some higher end defensive moments, and he's going to give you more intrigue on ball offensively. That intrigue only goes, like, you have Tyrese Halliburton and Pascal Siakam, who you're going to invest max money into both. And so there is the decision of, well, do we need to go in now and make this upgrade because these players aren't going to look more valuable on the trade market as we give them less runway to develop? And then like Miles Turner is going to be an expiring contract yet again. Does his name crop up in there? So yeah, as you mentioned, it feels like there's less control, but they might also, when you're looking at the Magic, they're not necessarily trying to render verdicts on any of their core players,
Right.
but Indy has these 2 higher lottery picks that it really does need to think about, well, where do they fit in immediately and long term?
Yeah. And maybe Orlando's there in a couple years with Black and Jet Howard. Like that's not where they are right now. I think it's just one, we don't actually need these guys yet. And it's,
Well, I still want to know why Jet Howard couldn't see the floor for a team that needed functional shooting so much. And I'm prepared to lead the riots if the Magic like are too conservative. Like you've got the cap space, you've got the trade assets. Go fucking do something incredible. Right. And if you don't, I'm going to yell at you from this podcast. And we know they care about that, Grant.
They do. They'll be like, did you guys hear the front office? They'll call a meeting first thing Monday morning, July 1. Did you guys hear Dan was like, he was a little rankled at our inactivity. What are we doing, guys? That's the end of that tier. We move on to as I look at it now, it's our smallest tier, but things are getting interesting now where there's like clearly identifiable, like, oh shit situations. The least of which is Houston, which is our first team here in tier 3. I love it. You got the old Rockets logo. Only one Rockets logo, as you noted, but it's the old one. So it's the Yao Ming Rockets logo.
Which is a badass logo. And
is that the Yao? Oh, they changed those red and white ones with Yao to sell a second Yao jersey.
I will say this is only tangentially related. The fact that teams have, for the most part, it feels like over the past decade or so, been so uninventive that it's put us in a position to where I know nostalgia is good, but we view nostalgia as novel. And so it's like you see these old jerseys or logos crop up and you're like, oh my God, that's so cool. Like, what a great idea. And they're just recycling the same shit because they can't come up with new, better ones, apparently.
Well, Utah's doing, did you see the Utah released like 4 new looks that they're going to roll out like through 20? We know now what the Jazz's 25, 26 uniforms are going to look like because that's a thing.
I did not see that. Are they better than the highlighter travesty?
They're moving away from that. It's much more the Greg Ostertag, Karl Malone, like late stage purple with the mountains look, which they've done a little bit of, but I don't hate it. I kind of actually like all of them. I will say,
I think people are smart enough now, or they're like numb to some of these basic bad ideas that they would appreciate if you take chances and miss, or at least they should. Whereas, I think, what was it? It was a Miami jersey a few years ago, maybe the Pacers jersey this year. One of the alternates where it's like, oh, it looks like a ransom font. Why would they do that? It's like, at least they took a fucking swing. Yeah. Like, and at least it stood out. Like, I'm at that point.
Okay. Speaking of taking swings, I don't know. I don't have you put it on a tee, but I don't know what to say about the Rockets taking swings. They have the number 3 pick. They could take a swing with that one. They could trade it. And what I forget who we get so many offseason reports. Tim McMahon, weeks ago now, probably, noted that like there's a suspicion that the Rockets want to take a big swing, and one or the other of Jalen Green and Alperen Şengün could be the guy that, one of those two might not be there going forward, which is, again, like we talked about with OKC, there's like extension realities when you got a bunch of young high lottery picks where you got to maybe start making some decisions before you want to. I don't know if I would go that far if I'm Houston, but it's really, there's some flexibility here. There's multiple timelines happening with the players on this roster, which always kind of leaves some openings for big change. But I don't know. Like, I think they clearly, will get to the other teams in this tier. I think they clearly belong at the back end of the chaos rankings for at least this tier.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, they're definitely, it seems like for now, they're not going to move anybody. They're trying to gear towards cap space again in 2025 and see where that gets you. But you could argue that they could be in the mix for just a litany of different types of, like, they're a good Donovan Mitchell team if he becomes available. They might be a good Trae Young or Darius Garland team if those guys become available. Literally there's, Towns doesn't make sense for them, but like you could name any bigger name that might become available. It's like, oh, I could see like why the Raptors would, or the Rockets, would want to get involved. They could be Mikal Bridges' team if he becomes available.
Yeah. And I think too, like I mentioned the timelines thing, that gets overblown a little bit, but like there's a scenario where they say they look at it and they think like, I'm not sure Van Vliet and Dylan Brooks are going to be as good as they need to be by the time the young guys are as good as they need to be for that to kind of, we have a meet in the middle for a couple of years where, the old guys are still good enough. The young guys have just gotten there. And then you could see like that at least leaves the door open for maybe you trade one of the vets because you get a huge haul because somebody like, I don't know, somebody really needs Fred VanVleet, like, that's a real thing. Like, I don't know, we wanted him to go to Orlando forever. Like that, who knows?
We were told Orlando didn't need a guard though. You remember that?
We were told that. All right. So the next three, we'll just put them up and then kind of, I don't know, pick and choose. Denver, maybe surprising to some people given the earlier than expected playoff exit. The Knicks and then the Kings round out this, I guess, middle tier, very small middle tier. You decide, Dan, which of these do you want to talk about first?
We'll start with I just find the Nuggets the least compelling of the bunch because there's a chance they could do nothing, and you can't rule out the possibility they just win a title next year. And I know people responded the way Michael Porter Jr. played and the way Jamal Murray played, and they were irate and they were talking about trades. They're just not like they weren't doing that when those guys were missing entire seasons. And so they're not going to go that route now. I know the second apron adds a wrinkle into them. KCP's free agency as a player option, that's a big deal. If they lose him,
yeah,
I'm not counting on that because if they lose him, I think that's a disaster, quite frankly. And so then you could argue they're going to shoot up the rankings. But other chaos, it's okay. Can they turn Zeke Najee's salary into another big or a backup point guard? And that's just like they're going to give out minimums. They have what is it, the number 28 pick. They're just like, even if they did a pick, like Zeke Najee, the number 28 pick, what does that get you? And you have to deal with kind of the reality of, well, you're trading Zeke Najee as a negative asset. And so part of that first round pick's value is, you have to take on Zeke Najee's money. That lowers your return. I don't know how you feel about it. I just don't find them, they're a compelling team, but transactionally and chaotically, they really shouldn't. And if they are an interesting team from that perspective, something has gone arguably terribly wrong.
Yeah, I think for them, what's compelling is just the stakes are higher because they won a title and they expect to be right back in the mix next year, and they were, capable of doing that this year. So like, even if it's just the KCP situation, like the stakes are just high. It's like, to compare it to another team here, which we have, well, actually, I don't know if comparing them to like the issue with Malik Monk in Sacramento is apples to apples, but it's just like if Malik Monk leaves the Kings, that's bad, but it's not going to make the difference between you start the year as a title favorite or you don't, which is like, that might be the case for Denver and KCP. Right. So I guess that should be that's an argument for moving Denver higher. But I think this overall stability just is what it is. Like they could do nothing, like you said, and like they're no worse than like probably third in like championship odds starting next season. So then we have the Knicks after the Nuggets. Just a lot could happen, right? Like there's a lot of ways to go. You've got, are we trading Julius Randle? We've got Isaiah Hartenstein's free agency. We got OG Anunoby's next deal. Do we swing big here? Do we wait? There's a lot of different moving parts. I guess the reason they're still in this middle tier is they had a hell of a playoff run with like half their team injured. And if you just, bring the whole gang back, like odds are that it'll be that good or better going forward. So I don't know, which I guess we've laid out several Knicks issues. Is there one that you see among them that is like, okay, if this one goes sideways, or this is where the most chaos could come from? Is that a Randall trade? Is it
I think it's a consolidation trade in general because you could they're in this weird spot where you could probably talk yourself out of any star player that they're linked to, because it's like, well, why wouldn't we just run back this team that was one win away from the conference finals while missing basically the entire rotation at one point? But you also have to look at the reality. You mentioned Hartenstein's free agency, OG Anunoby's free agency. If you give Hartenstein his quote unquote max that you could offer him and he takes it, and you also have to max out OG Anunoby, that money is going to bring you like, okay, now we're reconciling tax aprons. And on top of that, okay, maybe Jalen Brunson signs his extension. Julius Randle's extension eligible too. Even if you keep those guys on numbers that are lower than what they would get on the open market, like you're going to lock yourself into a lot of second apron scenarios. And we haven't really gotten into limitations yet because there are no teams that we've talked about that are up against this. But like the biggest limitations is a second apron team. Forget about the frozen draft picks. The bigger ones are no aggregating salaries. Like you can't trade two players for one. You can trade one player for two, but then it has to be a dollar for dollar salary match or less. And so like if you are in a second apron team before making a star trade, you basically removed the possibility of acquiring a star. Yeah. Because it has to be a 1-for-1 trade at that point. So if you're going to travel the route of I'll phrase it this way because maybe it doesn't involve trading Julius Randle. They need a better second best player. They absolutely need that. Whether that involves moving Randle or keeping him and shifting him down the pecking order, That I feel comfortable saying. I understand the logic of, well, look at how close they came this year. Other teams could be healthier too next year. Other teams could be better. We just talked about Orlando, like a team that could really rise up the rankings as an example. So I think that's where the chaos comes in, because it's not just making that trade. It's identifying the right player or then kind of settling on what you maybe like. Even Mikal Bridges, let's use it as an example. They go out and get him. Is that like a good enough second or like he's probably better off as your third best player? And then does that mean Randall's okay as your second best player? You're not settling in terms of what you're giving up, but then you're not getting a superstar either. And so there's just all these different scenarios that are kind of in play. And you also have to figure the age. What if you could get a Paul George or a Jimmy Butler, but Jimmy Butler's about to turn 35. Paul George is 34. So now you're paying these guys big money towards the end of their careers while giving up assets to get them. Maybe it's not a ton of assets. So you viewed it as, oh, did we kick the can? And we're going to use this massive salary attached to draft equity later on to go get that guy. There's so many different upgrade scenarios in play and so many different angles through which they can travel to make that upgrade. It's like even the Bojan Bogdanovic partial guarantee. If you have to max out OG Anunoby and then you're re-signing Hartenstein for his 17.2 million, whatever the exact number is per year, if you pick up the Bogdanovic guarantee, which was the idea when you traded him, like I think they're dangerously close to second apron territory at that point, if not actually in it. Mm-hmm. So like there's a lot that could not go wrong, could happen here, but they've earned the benefit of the doubt and they have leeway to say, run it. They could run it back and it just won't be, they'll be more expensive, but it won't be a disaster scenario.
Yeah. I think that's right. As I look at the Kings, we don't need to move them, but it's like, they don't face quite the same level or number of issues that I think the Knicks do. So, but still same tier, like, so getting the Mike Brown contract extension resolved, that's significant. Had they gone into this season with a lame duck coach, I think you could make a case the Kings needed to move up or definitely belonged at the front end of this tier, which they're at now. It's a little iffier now that Brown's under contract for another, 3 years, and he don't love the public negotiation that happened there.
Oh, you didn't view that as a competitive offer?
Yeah. So it's really the Malik Monk side of things where they're limited in what they can pay him. Maybe that'll be enough to beat the market. Maybe it won't. They don't really have the ability to replace him if they lose him. And then I guess, like, other than that, like, what are we looking at here with the Kings? Is it just a general, like, anxiety of you had your great season, you're a little worse this year? Like, what are we doing? Does that spur like rash action? I'm not sure beyond Monk really what the upheaval potential is here.
Well, I think you have to look at it through this lens of, okay, Keegan Murray will get better and he improved a lot defensively and he gave you some more optionality functionally offensively than I think maybe even they were planning on. Keon Ellis might get better and you've at least tapped into that well, and it's okay. Now we have some options here. You still missed the playoffs. And I know you were missing Kevin Huerter and I know you were missing Malik Monk at that point, but you still missed the playoffs and you could latch on to the injuries. You know who else was dealing with injuries? A shit ton of other teams. Yeah. Pelicans didn't have Zion Williamson, still were able to eke their way into the playoffs. The Grizzlies are going to be healthier. There are teams that are just going to get better where it's like, okay, the Warriors and the Lakers weren't world beaters, but one of those two teams is probably going to be appreciably better through trades or do something that makes them better. So the West is getting, like, it's not getting easier is my point. And so you just missed the playoffs in a year where, okay, it was harder than last season, but it's going to be even harder next season. And so that's where
we just talked about Memphis and Houston. Like, neither of them made they could both easily be. I mean, it would be surprising if Memphis was not better than the Kings next year. Houston is, who knows, but like, I'm just echoing your point. Like, it ain't getting easier.
And so that pressure, you kind of alluded to it, is what does that drive you to do? And it's one, is that the wrong decision? Or is it and it's just like, what are they actually prioritizing? Because the extent to which they were linked to Pascal Siakam was just uncomfortable for me. Mm-hmm. And I think it showed more about the market and the fact that OG Anunoby didn't want to go there than anything else. But that, like, you still need, it's either like, I would still skew towards, I want another wing in there. Mm-hmm. And Mikal Bridges would clearly be ideal, but like, what else is available? Does Alex Caruso do it for you? It's just, they need Because if you're set up front at the 5 with Sabonis, because you could say, well, get a 5 who spaces the floor and protects the rim next to him. Like, okay, there's like 3 players who do that at a level that would make sense for the Kings. You're set with De'Aaron Fox. You're set with Keegan Murray. And it's like, okay, so what are we doing? Like, who is the ideal player to plug in here? I would argue it probably is Mikal Bridges. If he's not available, do you settle? Like, as I mentioned, does an Alex Caruso do it for you? Are they able to? And also, they have this year's draft pick is in the lottery. Does that make a trade more appealing or less appealing because they can't trade their 25 draft pick now since that's rolled over to Atlanta? And since that pick didn't convey this year. So you're also up against these weird limitations. I think it's chaos in the sense that I feel like they need to do something substantial and they have the resources to probably do it, but is the right opportunity out there for them to do it? And does that, if it's not, are they going to set themselves back by doing nothing, or do they do something that's a middle ground, but still the wrong move? Is it the right move? They're in such a weird, there's a lot of these teams that are just in like this gray area. Like, I think you could loop Memphis into the same thing where you could talk yourself into them needing to get noticeably better to hang with the best of the, like the West is just such a bloodbath. It's basically where I'm at.
It is. Yeah. They really are kind of like a distinct team because like, Memphis won 50 plus games, 2 years in a row before this. And the Kings are like, they just kind of moved into the, like, need to be taken seriously tier of the league. And it's like, how do you move a notch higher than that with the resources they have? And like, it's really hard because we're talking about like, you might lose Monk. And then like,
and how much worse? Or like, how are you you're not replacing Monk. I would think, like, who are you getting with the mid-level exception, which you can use via trade? That helps. But who are you getting that's like, okay, we'll be fine. We'll be as good without Monk.
Right. I mean, like, the mid-level is a real, like, I don't know if maybe they get Derek Jones Jr. I don't know why that would happen, or maybe they get Kelly Oubre, give him the mid-level, and that gives you the athleticism and wing defense. But it's like, if you're setting that against losing Monk, it's like, I don't know, that's a wash? Maybe.
And if you're
maybe
relying
not
on Kelly Oubre for your wing defense, we need to have some conversations.
We do. All right, moving on. Now this is where stuff starts to get real. We're up in tier 2 now. Leading us off there is the Milwaukee Bucks. Everything's basically fine, because, right? No problems there.
Yeah, they should be higher, but they almost physically can't be because they're going to be a second apron team. And so unless you're trading Brook Lopez, Damian Lillard, Chris Middleton, or Giannis, the ceiling on who you can acquire is just so limited. And even I would say, are they willing to attach, what do they have, the number 23 pick, which you can move before it's a salary so you can combine it with a player, like to Bobby Portis? Like, who are you getting for that? Do they even want to trade Bobby Portis? And then you move into the realm of, okay, who do Pat Connaughton's making $9.4 million. Do we move him in a first round pick? Who does that get you? You had this idea. It feels like they need to get better. They could be healthier and still be a contender in the East, but I wouldn't pick them to win the championship next year when left alone. You're going to lose Malik Beasley, who is super valuable. By the way, super valuable at both ends. When you just look at the assignments that he was covering on defense, he's leaving. If they don't have his bird rights, they're not going to have the mid-level exception. Like, he's gone. And if he comes back, they're probably going to be docked for tampering, which they won't care about. So it's like, you mentioned Ayo Dosunmu as a trade target. Connaughton in a first-round pick for Ayo Dosunmu. I think that helps them a lot, but it's like, that's sort of the limit. Is that maybe they could get Alex Caruso if they're willing to trade Bobby Portis and give up their 2031 first as well. But it's just, there's chaos potential here because it feels like their lack of options in the middle of the roster is my point. It took me a while to get here, but I promise it's going somewhere. Does that lead them to consider any like semi-nuclear scenarios, or are they forced into, Damian Lillard seems happy there, but does that change if they're not able to do something over I think a Giannis Antetokounmpo trade that's not happening. He's not going to request out. But if you're looking at the state of your roster, the age of some of your players, do you at least not consider, like, if there are names out there that you deem gettable and will make your roster more sensible or better equipped, let's say, to navigate the regular season and the playoffs? Is a Middleton and or Brook Lopez trade like completely off the table?
I mean, it can't be. It's just because of the inflexibility of the second apron. Like, I don't think any of that stuff is likely. I just think that, like, I don't know, maybe it's just the residue of a season where, like, you hired the wrong coach and then you hired Doc Rivers and then, like, everything kind of went to shit, and everything feels very, one, I think it's fair to say we're getting near the end of like this version of the Bucks run, just by virtue of like Brooke Lopez's age and the cost of this roster, and Damian Lillard's age, and like all that, and Middleton, Giannis even maybe is going to start his decline phase soon if it hasn't already begun. Like there's that aspect, and there's the, like, how sure are we that, that Doc Rivers is there's all that stuff. Like, but I don't, again, because they just are so limited, like their hands are so tied. It's almost like stuff can't really change unless like something really, like if they trade Lopez and or Middleton or whatever, then like they deserve to be higher than this maybe. But like, it's just so hard to do that stuff.
Yeah, so I'm almost wondering if we put them too high because of their lack of optionality here. But I think the stakes are so high for them that they're probably in the right spot.
Yeah. All right. I'll give you 3 here in a row. We got Detroit, we got New Orleans, and we got Atlanta. Pretty
Detroit
different.
is just, do you think, I'm almost wondering if Detroit could stand to be bumped down, because now that you've gone from Troy Weaver, who's gone from the organization, to Trajan Langdon, and he has the agency, it seems like, to do whatever based off the fact that Weaver's gone and he's evaluating the future of Monty Williams. I guess getting rid of Monty Williams so early into his deal counts as chaos, but like it seems like it removes the dramatic scenarios of them overspending in free agency on the trade market. But you pointed this out on the last podcast. This is me rationalizing in real time. So now you have Trajan Langdon coming in. None of these guys are his. And so it's like, how married are you to the developmental arcs of Cade Cunningham is sticking, but like Asar Thompson, Jalen Duren, Jaden Ivey, Marcus Sasser. So is there, I would probably say Asar Thompson and Cade Cunningham are locked in to this roster long-term, but like, is anybody else really guaranteed that when there's been this front office shift?
Yeah, I think you're weighing 2 things. It's the stability, job security of a newly installed executive of like, clearly, if they suck again, he's not getting fired. Like that's just not gonna, they're not doing that. Balancing that against what you just said of like, I don't know, like just when the new guy's in charge, there's a lot more options on the table than like Troy Weaver wasn't gonna just, cut bait with all the, he signed Isaiah Stewart to that contract. He drafted these guys. Like he's not going to just clean house. I'm not saying Trajan Langdon is, but the odds are higher of significant changes happening to purported core players with a new guy in charge than they were with the old guy, I think. So like the potential for chaos is pretty high, but we've been talking about stakes forever here. Like the stakes are still really low because the Pistons are not going to be, a contender, certainly. Like maybe if they go nuts and spend all their money on the right guys, they could be a playoff threat. But like it's just, I don't see that, which distinguishes them a little bit from the next 2 teams, both of whom are just never going to get out of like trade rumors between Brandon Ingram and Trae Young and DeJounte Murray and David Griffin with the Pelicans saying, we've taken a look at continuity. We're good on that. We're going to make some changes. Like that's basically like saying, put us in tier 2 of the chaos rankings because we're going to do something. So I think I view New Orleans and Atlanta kind of similarly, where it's like change is probably coming. It's just a question of what it looks like and how substantial it is.
Yeah, it feels like New Orleans' change needs to come at a higher level than Atlanta's, which has more of this open-ended but flawed timeline, where with the Pelicans, it's no, like you need to operate with some semblance of acceleration. And how do you do that? Because I think they have 2 distinct needs. A better front court running mate for Zion Williamson. Either they need to stretch the floor consistently and in high volume, protect the rim, or both. And they need a floor general, someone who can play off Zion Williamson, but also independent of him, because we know Zion's going to miss a bunch of time. And I'm very curious to see how invested or how willing they are to address those needs. And the other thing looming over all this is Brandon Ingram's future, his extension eligibility, whatever. And who are you using as your salary matching tool, primary salary matching tool in any big time trade? And by the way, looming over all this too, you're fairly close to the tax. Like if you want to bring back Jonas Valanciunas at the same number and bring back Najee Marshall, you're just a tax team. And I don't think New Orleans is going to be a tax team. They've said in the past they will pay the tax. I maintain that I will believe it when I see it. That's just where I'm at with New Orleans. And so how are you just reconciling all these different needs and realities at once? I do think the fact that they have the assets to make something happen So can they go out there and get a DeJounte Murray, or should they be involved in the Trae Young sweepstakes? They should definitely be in on Donovan Mitchell if he becomes available. Will they prefer though? Do they even I'm very curious. I would love to give David Griffin truth serum and see, like, are you actually, it feels like the way he was talking is he's going to change up the core, but he doesn't necessarily think that they need a floor general. And I'm just wondering if that was public posturing, because I think that, and I don't know if you agree, is the bigger need than finding a different type of running mate for Zion up front.
Yeah, I go back and forth. I think you need both, and I think you're probably only going to get one of those things. I don't know. I mean, maybe like it's funny that these two teams are together because there are a lot of trades you can cook up involving both of them, Atlanta and New Orleans. That like, oh, that kind of sorted some things out for both of these teams. We got a couple more in this tier here.
Well, I was going to say really quickly on
Okay.
Atlanta, their chaos is kind of born from the fact that, so now they have the number one pick. Couldn't you talk yourself into literally anything with that team where it's, did they trade the number one pick to try and get better around DeJounte Murray and Trae Young? Did they trade DeJounte Murray? Did they trade Trae Young? I think you could talk me into them doing literally anything this offseason.
It could even be, let's just take, like, say, I think Zachary Risachet is the projected number one pick now, who like might just be that like in between wing combo forward that they actually need. Like, I granted, by the time he reaches his potential, Trae Young will be probably not on the team anymore, or he'll be 32 or whatever. But like that's a scenario too. Also, by the way, I didn't even think about them having the first pick in thinking about the chaos rankings, just because it seems like nobody is falling all over themselves to trade for that pick this year.
Yeah, I haven't seen this level of indifference near the top of the draft since probably 2013.
It's been a long, sure. Like I can't remember. Maybe it is 2013. It's been at least that long. I guess like they deserve to be here though. Atlanta does at the top of this, just because like they might trade Trae Young. They might trade the guy that was a franchise cornerstone for as long as he's been there. And that's like inherently that changes things significantly.
And that's one of the topics we disagree on. Is I don't think they should. You think they should. I just don't. If you're going to do that, and I've entertained the idea that does getting the number one pick increase the likelihood you trade Trae Young and operate on a more gradual timeline. But when you don't have your own first control of it in 25, 26, or 27, so they're sending 2 picks to San Antonio plus the 26 swap, it just makes it so much less palatable. But then there is the option on the table of, well, what if we trade DeJounte Murray back to San Antonio or Trae Young to San Antonio and we're getting our picks back? Mm-hmm. So that's why I said it could be anything. It could be an aggressive, we're going to try to win now, we're going to just try and reorient the roster, or maybe they actually do. I don't think they will tear it down, but I'm saying all these possibilities are on the table, which is why they probably have a case now post-draft lottery to be in tier 1.
I was just going to ask you, like, do we think maybe of the teams, we have 2 more in this tier, but I think so far of the teams we've talked about, Atlanta might have the best case to move up a tier. We don't need to do it necessarily. We can just acknowledge it. So Miami and Minnesota round out tier 2 here.
We'll put Miami and Minnesota definitely belong behind Atlanta now, right?
I think that's right.
Yeah, there we go. So Atlanta's been bumped up to the top of tier 2.
Yeah. Minnesota, like I can't imagine that anything we would say about Minnesota will be the first time you've heard it, about the second apron, the ownership uncertainty, which sounds now like it's going to, I remember getting anchored to the idea of like, oh, they started mediation at the beginning of May. Like this will be fine. It's like, it's going to take months apparently, because they're just at such loggerheads that there's resolution is going to be really difficult to achieve. So the ownership uncertainty, what that might mean or might not mean for how much whoever takes control of the team is willing to spend. And then the trickle down of that is like what possible trades might happen and when. Like I think we've said ad nauseum, don't do it now. Like just at least wait till the deadline. But like for a team that had the season the Wolves just did, they're not going into the summer just like nothing to see here. There's still like actual financial issues. There's still like rotation needs potentially, but they're prohibitively expensive and they're going to be limited in what they can do. And they're too good to just cut salary or to trade and get worse in a trade, which is just, I don't know if it's like, if the chaos potential is as high as certainly some of the tier 1 teams, but like the decisions are tough and the stakes are high. So we're kind of like ticking all of the chaos boxes to some extent for the Wolves.
Yeah, and by the way, so we know Tim Connolly will be back for at
Right.
least
Didn't
another
mention
year.
that.
That takes, and but also just who's going to own this team will be a huge factor as well. And then how does that then factor into how what everything you laid out? Who like if it's the A-Rod, Mark Lore, if they're owning the team or controlling the team, does that make it more or less likely that they're going to do a cost cutting maneuver or make a trade? And then vice versa, if it's Glenn Taylor who's in control as he is now, I think I if anything, I think there's an argument to put them way lower because I just don't think you can justify doing anything stupid or like drastic in the wake of making the conference finals.
Mhm.
But there's also the possibility, like, what if there is a team that's willing to give you stuff, like two players who make your rotation a little more, they give you shooting and some more playmaking while taking out Karl-Anthony Towns because you have Naz Reid there. Like, there
Mhm.
is that possibility on the table. I can't spot the team. Like,
Right.
I don't know what team is going to come in and say that, but the fact that it will probably be on the table, and they're also just this heavyweight that has, I would say, two very distinct, very real, very meaningful shortcomings in. They need some more playmaking juice, and they definitely need some more perimeter shooting.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. No, I agree. Like, it's just it's another one. They were so good. Like how how
It could
chaotic.
also, by the way, I don't know how much this matters, but like if Cleveland or maybe the Lakers start poaching Mike and like would they lose their top assistant,
Mhm.
like that could matter.
I
That
don't know.
just throw like another. It's just more turnover. Minnesota's
Yeah.
had enough turnover for a while. Let's see them run it back again.
Yeah. Okay. So Miami, obviously, again, like they don't have to do anything with Jimmy Butler. He's under contract, but the between his, his apparent desire for max extensions and Pat Riley's like very gamesmanship heavy comments about Jimmy Butler after the season, like that's a real thing. And because it is Jimmy Butler who has had some kind of rough exits from teams, it's you've got to give that a little bit of credence, I think, in terms of like, okay, this could become a mess
Mhm.
potentially. I don't know how likely that is because money solves everything, and maybe the Heat do just pony up or they trade him. But like, this is a thing. I mean, there's stuff in Miami maybe beyond that we should talk about, but that really is the reason the Heat are this high, right?
Yeah, I think because that could go sideways is really the and I think the other element of that is, and we framed it this way because it's accurate. If Caleb Martin opts out and they want to keep him, they're one Caleb Martin raise away from just being in the second apron, which
Yep.
this is not a team that's good enough to be in the second apron. And so what happens? And then how do you improve? Because let's say they're even out of the second apron. They have the salaries to pull off a mega trade. They don't really have the draft equity to do so. And even when you start talking about what if it's just like they're trading one of their salaries, like the mid-end salaries, and it's okay, well, what is Duncan Robinson plus first getting you that makes you like better to the point where you feel comfortable about making that move and thinking you're going to be a contender.
Hmm.
That what or the same thing with Tyler Hero or the same thing with Terry Rozier. I honestly don't know. They feel like a prime candidate to like kind of if it's not run it back, but it's like they're going to be ended up leaning on a lot of experimental procedures next year. And could you see them even like do they trade number 15 in the draft to maybe try and trade like the one thing I thought about is because they're the Heat and they like to hit on these guys on the margins, do you offer the Knicks 15 for 24 and 25 to try and just hit on
Mm.
two guys in the first round? Like that kind of seems like where their off season is going to end at, which is decidedly not chaotic, but just the Jimmy Butler of it all.
Hmm.
And the fact that they will be linked to stars, I do think that drives up the chaos factor quite a bit.
Yeah. And so, but they do not make the top tier, which is reserved for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 teams we have yet to discuss. We will lead off tier number 1. So the highest chaos ranking, a very official scientific measure. The Golden State Warriors are our first team in this top tier.
Please take it away. I don't want to have to say a word.
Yeah. So the Warriors are here for, I mean, you can kind of choose where you want to start, not going in order of importance necessarily, but Chris Paul's $30 million non-guarantee, Klay Thompson's free agency, hypothetically the most fraught emotional negotiation we might see this offseason. What's it going to take to bring him back? Is there a number that he's satisfied with that the Warriors are? Is another team coming over the top? The Warriors assistant coaching staff might change a lot. Kenny Atkinson could be somewhere else. They lost tragically Dejan Miljevic during the year. So there's potential for upheaval there. The Warriors have just been bleeding assistant coach. Mike Brown left. Luke Walton left a long time ago. That's just what happens when you're successful. Jama Malalela went to Toronto. So you just ultimately like the biggest big picture take is you still have Steph Curry. You still should try to win for him, which he wants to do. You got a bunch of young guys that you might trade for a superstar or a star. You have enough picks to really actually make competitive offers for some guys that'll be out there. Just which route in the choose your own adventure do you select? And there will be ripple effects, because if you trade all these young guys, then like once Curry's done, boy, are you like short on outs. So
Yeah.
a pivotal offseason, which also comes with like, I don't know what the Warriors do that gets them into the true first class contender tier. So there's that too, which probably pushes you towards conservatism, which is like, can we do that with Steph still here? And especially if we bring back Klay Thompson to play with Draymond. So, I just spilled probably 1,000 words on this. Like, what are you fixated on with the Warriors? Is there one thing? Is it all of a piece together?
I think it's really because the Joe Lacob comments, I know I've said this ad nauseum on the podcast in February on the Tim Kawakami podcast for The Athletic about how they're not looking to duck the second apron. They're looking at being out of the luxury tax altogether. I'm just like, okay, so Chris Paul gone. Like, you're out of the luxury tax right now, but you have to fit Klay Thompson in under that. And you can still do that and be out of the luxury tax. The fuck does that do to your competitiveness in the Western Conference at that point? And that's going to dictate ultimately what they do. But also what lends itself to chaos is because like you could see them just like if they're salary dumping Andrew Wiggins at some point, that's chaos. If they're going all in on a blockbuster trade, that's chaos. If they kind of roll it back and they're in the tax, but maybe they'll look at to cut it by the end of the trade deadline or before next season, that is going to lend itself to midseason chaos. I want to throw this question to you, and I think it's maybe the most chaotic question possible. Who is the worst player? I don't care if they're available or not. Who's the worst player you could trade for that would make the Warriors a contender? You said you don't know who it is. So I'm saying you have to take the worst player imaginable that you think still gets them to that. I don't care if it's like just as a baseline for how talented, because I'm very much looking forward to criticizing the Warriors for not acquiring a star without suggesting the star because that's what's invariably going to happen this offseason. So that's the question I have for you.
It's such a high bar, right? It's definitely not the Alex Caruso level, right? It's got to be way better than that. It might not even be Lauri Markkanen. Like, it might
say the Mikal Bridges, Larry Markkanen tier. It's probably not them either, right?
That's where you got to really squint, I feel like. But you could start there. You would have to go into like a whole bunch of, but also if like, Draymond can still shoot threes for another year inexplicably, and Kuminga takes a step, but then like all these other ifs you're talking about are like, well, you probably had to trade some of them for Markkanen. So you're like peeling off other, ways for the team to get better. So, I mean, the answer to your question may be that guy's not available. Like there is no such player, but I think you can start having a rational conversation about the Warriors getting into that top tier with the Markkanen Bridges level, but you should not feel like that's not a given at all. No. Like there's not, that doesn't, no problem. Okay. We're back. Like that's not what would happen.
I think part of the issue is, especially with those players, is because you mentioned Kuminga taking a step forward. Those players might just cost you Kuminga.
Right. That's what I mean.
Oh yeah. So, and the other thing I was thinking of, and two things, is could they feasibly go the route of, just as an example, if it was like we turned Andrew Wiggins salary, we're not using Kevon Looney, GP2 if he picks up his player option, into DeJounte Murray and DeAndre Hunter, or DeJounte Murray and Bogdan Bogdanovic. Does something like that where it's, you're not divesting, but it's okay, we're acquiring two non-stars that make our rotation more capable. Does that get them there? And I don't think the answer is yes.
No, I really think that the only way it happens is an addition of the Markkanen Bridges level or higher that also leaves you enough guys on the roster between just say between Kuminga, Moody, Podziemski, Trace Jackson Davis, leaves you enough of those guys to have any realistic hope of like, okay, one or two might pop. Mm-hmm. Like, because all of the above would have to happen. Like you have to get the guy in trade. You also have to keep like enough young guys who improve significantly to offset the loss of a couple others probably. And like everyone's got to stay healthy. Like it's just all, you keep going down the list of like what needs to happen. It's not impossible, but it's just like, this is what happens at the end of things, right? Like you just, the odds get longer and longer as stars age and, you reach the end of a version of a team.
This is all to say, I really want him to still be available at number 52 and for the Warriors to take Bronny James at number 52 because that would fuel
Oh,
the LeBron
can you?
scenarios. But that's my troll. But I'm legitimately asking you this question. You're running the Warriors. What are you doing this offseason? Not specifically, but let's just say there are moves to be made that make you better, but they're imperfect the way you framed it as they don't guarantee you title contention. Are you that obligated to optimize what's left of Steph's window? Or is it we won our 4 championships? We need to plan around life after him. I tend to think the latter option is so overrated because Steph is one of one. But when you've won 4 champions and you're not going to win a title with this. That's done. 2022 was nice. It's never happening again if you don't make serious changes. But if things break right and younger guys get better and you keep this current core, you stay relatively healthy, you could make noise in the West. You're not going to win it.
Yeah, I think, and I know, I feel like I've been kind of beating this drum. I think I might have even been wrong to be beating this drum, like even in the 22 title season. But because we just spent time talking about like the guy's not out there, like the guy that elevates you to the level you want to be at to like quote unquote, pay Curry back or like, make it worth it to him isn't there.
Right.
So if it's me, I think I am at least waiting until the trade deadline
Okay.
to do something like that, just because right now I'm not seeing the guy that or the guys that could realistically be acquired that would give you the first path that you're talking about of like, let's go for it. Let's build the best team. Like, it's just, you're not going to get there. And so to me, it's not worth it right now to like maybe just say the first 5 years after Steph is gone are going to be horrible. Like, I don't think I would be comfortable making that decision yet. And I'm just maybe I'm just procrastinating. Maybe I'm just saying like, I'm going to have to make this decision in February or right now. I guess I'll choose February. Like that's kind of where I'm at on it.
My only pause there would be the types of acquisitions the Warriors would need to make. They tend not to materialize at the trade deadline. Like those are very much off-season moves unless there's a trade demand we don't see coming, which is why you wait, is because you think the market is going to develop even further.
Right. Well, and I've even seen this alluded to. It's like the Warriors are not like they don't have Markkanen like circled on a whiteboard anywhere necessarily. They have like Giannis and Embiid. Like those are they're so absurdly ambitious. Like those are the names that you like, oh, you know who they're really, they're waiting on that, which like may never, probably almost certainly will never happen. But I think you're asking like either of those guys, that gets you there. Like if you could pull that off, that's the level of player it might take. And I think whether it's like ill-advised or not, I feel like waiting maybe gives you a slightly better chance at getting someone of that level. But like, or you do the Bronny thing. You're like, we just hold him for ransom until LeBron forces it.
I want that's the team. I know there's all these other different like permutations and then no, Bronny James to the Warriors at number 52. Let's fuel those. And by the way, if he's there and I'm the Warriors, that's what I say to Steph. We're not going to do any of these other wild trade ideas, and we're not like, but like this is our swing. So if LeBron wants to come, like we're just going to take him at number 52.
Oh God, I hope that happens. All right, that was a lot of time on one team, but it kind of warranted it. Let's go Phoenix next.
They have. I mentioned this to you before we start recording. They've like lost their chaos luster to me, and maybe it's just we're so far removed from them really sucking in the playoffs. But like they've hired their coach in Mike Budenholzer, and they just have so few realistic options to explore. But the chaos factor is there because Matt Ishbia, one, thinks that 26 other teams in the league want to be the Suns, and two, he came out and said, which you never hear this level. It wasn't even indifference, but disdain for the idea that they would keep their first round picks. So you can trade 2 first round picks technically that won't be actual salary. It's 2031, and then what number are they in this year's draft? So, but whatever, you trade those, number 22 and 2031. You have the Yusuf Nurkic salary just because you're not going to trade one of your big 3 and Bradley Beal is the no trade clause. I'm just like, they could do that. Mm-hmm. And then if you're a Phoenix fan and you see them trade their 2031 first round pick, while sending out no more than like 17 million, whatever Yusuf Nurkic is making, who are you getting that you're like willing to do that?
Yeah. I think ultimately I feel like Phoenix has to be here. Maybe that's like residual chaos of just what's happened over the last year. but they are so their options are so limited. And this, like, welcome to the second apron. Like, we are seeing they're like the canary in the coal mine of like how ugly is this gonna get potentially in terms of like
I would say welcome to life when you trade yourself into the second
what
apron. Like when
right.
you kind of organically get there and retain like the Knicks as an
Yeah.
example. But sorry, go ahead.
No. That's what this is. Like, this is almost a test case, right? It is a test case. They're the first ones to plunge this deep, this aggressively. Seemingly like in absolute disdain of the rules of like this won't hurt. We'll figure it out. Like, we'll see, I guess. I still think they belong here, even though they really can't do almost anything of consequence. Like, but I just don't know what else to do with them because it's been so chaotic to this point. And like their stakes are high, not so much in the they're a first class contender sense, but in the sense of like you spent a whole ton of money on this team, you don't have a lot of outs. Like, the pressure is there for that reason, because this is it, more or less. Like, you got to figure out how to make this work, tinkering on the margins with like no tools to do it.
So they have their biggest realistic salary matching tool is Yusuf Nurkic at $18.1 million. And I'm just looking at the players that are like, I don't think Utah would do this, but like if you gave up both your first round picks and Yusuf Nurkic for Larry Marketing, okay, I'd probably do that just as a value play.
Yeah.
Would you give up one first round pick to get Jonathan Isaac to play 14 minutes a game for you? I just like, it's not going to get, because the Yusuf Nurkic salary is not a net positive salary. And so it's like, I even thought, like, would the two first get you Denny Avdia? Do you think about that? I mean, they also do have Grayson Allen's salary, of course, that they could. What is the name? The way that Matt Ishbia was talking about like, what is the name that if you could trade one first round pick in salary and it's not the 2031 first round pick and you get a flyer on Jonathan Isaac, or you get a flyer on Robert Williams III is a guy that would be, I think, fantastic for this team, assuming he's healthy. But like,
and look, like, so you said they have 22 in this draft, and then they have their 2031 that they can trade, right?
And it has to be a sweet spot, by the way. So like, it has to be, they can trade number 22 when the draft is no longer future, right, but it's also not an actual salary.
Right. Well, but what I was going to say is nobody wants anything to do with this draft. Right. So that pick, that number 22 is worth less than most number 22s, let's just say, in recent memory. That 2031, what percentage of GMs currently in power will be in power and to make that pick? Like 10 of them, maybe? Like,
whoa, that seems high.
Well,
like, I was thinking Sam Presti and like, that's it. Like, the Nuggets might cheap out on Calvin Booth at some point.
Tim Connolly might be on his next, 7th 1-year extension with the Wolves by then.
Well, it'd basically be the Spurs front office and Sam Presti. And then like, I'm honestly like, I know Nico Harrison's having a moment right now, but like when you're talking about actual job security, I guess Pat Riley would be, will Pat Riley be alive?
You don't want to get grim, but yeah, let's be realistic. That all I'm saying is like, those might be the two least valuable first round picks any team could trade, because for very varying reasons. But
2031 is valuable in a vacuum, just not to the front office that would be acquiring it.
Not on planet Earth in real life, though, is the problem.
Well, you're hamstrung by the fact that any salary you trade, basically, Yusuf Nurkic with 2 years left on his deal, that's not a net positive deal. I guess Grayson Allen's the only will be tradable contract that I think could have positive value. Otherwise, part of your pick outlay is going towards, you're taking on the Yusuf Nurkic money, or I guess Nas Little doesn't really fall into this category because it's so tiny money in short term. But I don't know if you mentioned this. I apologize if you missed it. The other chaos factor here for them is, what if Kevin Durant just gets the itch to request a trade again? I know Devin Booker has said that he won't.
So should we have led with that? Like, because that's always on the table.
What is this? Just like, hey, let's make this let's bookend the Warriors discussion. Is it just time for the reunion? Can they help each other?
Maybe he's in a class above Markkanen and Bridges. Like, at least we're having a conversation about that, elevating them to where they want to be. All right, enough. You got anything else on Phoenix? You want to move on here?
Well, very quickly. You don't even have to extrapolate. Will they keep this year's first round pick?
No.
Will they keep the 2031 first round? Will they have the 2031 first round pick by the 2025 trade deadline?
I can't listen to Matt Ishbia speak about first round picks the way he did and say they will also keep that pick. Don't you think? Because what else are they going to do? How else do they do anything? They have to trade them, even though they're worth nothing.
Unless I'm just trying to look at the players where it would actually be worth that to feed, and it's just I don't think they exist, to be honest with you. So it would be borderline malpractice to trade that 2031 pick. Unless you're all of a sudden just it's the deadline, you're the 1 seed in the West, and the vibes are back. But
yeah, I would just answer that by saying I hope the Suns have malpractice insurance, because get ready for some. They're probably glad they have it based on how they've put this roster together over the last year and a half. Philly is our next team, which is, I mean,
mostly good chaos, right?
Yeah, it's very much like they're in full control of like any number of options. They have all that cap space, 60 plus million potentially. Nobody is under contract other than like Embiid, Maxey. I can't even remember the other.
Not even technically under contract.
You're right. Yeah, I mean, he's not. He's currently a free agent. I guess. Paul Reed, I think, has a partial guarantee. It's just like there's just clean slate basically. So I guess it's chaotic potentially in terms of like, might be Paul George, might be like 4 starting caliber guys that get signed. It might be a big trade because you can take on a salary. So it's all good reasons. Ultimately, like I don't know what the downside is. Like they just don't get guys that they want, but they're still very flexible.
The way you framed it, their cap sheet is like Bobby Marks's wet dream. Right,
like it's empty. There's nobody on
it. I guess the only negative form of chaos is if you don't get a Paul George, they're also what's tough for them, and we have mentioned this, they can trade up to 5 first-round picks, but they can't trade any players because you're not including Embiid in that deal. And like teams are going to prioritize players in a lot of their packages, so their offers can be very aggressive, very competitive. They will almost always be beat if you're talking about the highest level available players. So if you end up not getting a star in free agency via trade, whatever, like does the Joel Embiid timeline get a little, how much can you, I know Maxey's emergence helps and you were so good with the 2 of them on the floor. You could still sign some mid-end guys, bring back some of your own players like Kelly Oubre, maybe you bring back D'Anthony Melton. Like there are just guys like Nick Batum, maybe you convince him not to retire. But like we're getting to a point, Joel Embiid in his 30s, lots of injuries in the rear view. Even when he's playing, he can look banged up. We saw it this past postseason. Like, I'm not saying he would request a trade, and I would probably bet against it if they don't land any big names, but that is kind of floating around in the background here is, can you, I don't want to call it a gap year, but can you do another placeholder type year like you just did? In theory, sure. In practicality, probably not.
Yeah. No, that was a big issue with all the Harden stuff of like, remember when all that was happening, the possibility of like, well, yeah, this might be a gap year. Like, how can you have a gap year with like a reigning MVP? Like that's just, you can't do that. You're going to risk alienating him. You can't do that again. You really can't do that again. I think too, just looking for like downsides, because I think we agree, like most of this is just like, what version of a really good offseason will the Sixers have? It's not so much like how badly can it go, but it is a little disconcerting that I think Paul George is just the guy that everybody points to as the best option. That doesn't make him like a great option objectively. Like he's on the older side. His own team is reluctant to give him 4 years. And like, so just saying we got the best guy available, if they sign Paul George, like that's good. You're going to be awesome next year. But like, that's not to say that he's the perfect fit or like this is the greatest value. It's just like this is the best guy in a class that nobody likes.
He's probably a perfect fit immediately, but when you're trying to scale forward, with his pay and his age, but I do think if we call it a gap year, like this wasn't a gap year because Tyrese Maxey was that good, and so they won't have a gap year next season. But to reach like the high, like you're asking if they want to be among the teams that have a 5% chance or better of winning the title type deal, like you need to do some real stuff this offseason. There's a chance that they don't because those opportunities aren't out there or they don't have the firepower when you look at tangible assets. Sure, the draft equity, the cap space, that's great. But I'm like, among all the big names we've mentioned who could be available, like what is the team that's going to prioritize cap relief and draft picks over, let's say, draft picks and players? I don't know that we've named, like Atlanta might come close.
Yeah, it's tough. I think like what should be concerning is that we have the Sixers in the top tier this year, and there's a really good chance they're back next year for like much worse
Wow.
reasons.
I didn't
You
even
know,
I didn't think of it that way. Yeah.
I mean, it's possible. It's very
It's
possible, but
mostly
only
positive
because of
though.
the Embiid stuff, right? I
Yeah.
don't think you're making shit up about like we should have an eye on the Embiid thing.
No, and it's weird because it's the way we view players, and then they saw, or not we specifically. Why do I always have to use that caveat? But like we view players as like, oh, they're bargains or in these favorable lights. They sign the bigger deal, and all of a sudden it's we dislike them. As of right now, the Sixers cap space, it's mystique. It could be anyone. It could be
Right.
anything. And if we're talking about this same thing next year, it's a problem.
Yeah. Right. All right. So we got 3 left here. Let's just put both LA teams up here. The Lakers and then the Clippers, or either way. Um, I'll lead us off with the Lakers. It's LeBron James contract. It's the Bronny James. Who knows what? It's the JJ Redick probably has the job in the bag as the head coach, and all the uncertainty that comes with that.
Did you see what he said before we were, or that came out? What he said before we recorded this podcast?
No.
Where it's like, oh, that'll be the LA rumors will be addressed in the offseason. And so I read that as I want to commentate on the NBA finals, and or my current employer was mad that they already lost one of their finals commentators to the Bucks. So yes, I'm already with the Lakers, but I can't talk about it. And there's a chance that I'm not even digging into the NBA finals. I'm just gonna off the cuff this analysis.
Well, I mean, Shams really wojed it up with, I think he said that the Lakers are zeroing in on Redick, which is like how Woj used to break draft news of like they're fixated on, or
the Lakers are lasering in on. That was,
yeah.
What a time. That was fun. That was fun.
The aperture is narrowing. But yeah, no. So like that seems done. What else am I missing with the Lakers? I guess just the
D'Lo of it all.
The
player option.
Yeah. The trade for a superstar and the D'Lo thing working together. So yeah, there's just lots going on. Stakes are always high. LeBron's gonna be 40. Like there's everything is angling towards like urgency, I guess.
And they're gonna have up to 3 tradable first round picks plus swaps. They have some salary matching tools. I want to ask you this. It's more of a macro question, but I'm using specific players as an example. If you could go the route of acquiring a singular star, let's say it's Trae Young or it's Donovan Mitchell, or you could get, let's say, DeJounte Murray and Bojan Bogdanovic.
Mm-hmm.
Between those 2 pathways, what are you as the Lakers choosing? And you also here, you do have to factor in, let's say if you go the Murray Bogdanovic route, you're probably still holding on to some of your asset powder. Whereas if you're getting Mitchell or Trae, like it's obliterating whatever available first round picks you have.
Yeah, it's hard. Well, I was thinking when you said you hold on to some stuff, it's like maybe you somehow keep Reeves or like Hachimura or something. But I think I was going to say, because either way, whether it's for one guy or a couple guys, odds are you're not leaving that transaction with like much draft equity left, if any. So if you frame it, I'm reframing it. Yeah, I'm taking your hypothetical and I'm going to take it apart. I kind of feel like you're not getting out of that without giving up most or all of the picks you can trade. So in that decision, I just want the one guy. I think Mitchell is the one that I'm warming to more and more of. Like, I kind of think he might be the like needle mover that really I like the best of the biggest big name options.
Based on the reporting, it feels like he also may be the least available. Like if he's just going to sign his extension, it feels like Trae Young or Garland would be eminently more gettable.
Yeah, I think that's right. I just don't. I think Mitchell is just a better player than anyone else they can get. And so if you're swinging big, like swing biggest, right? So that's the way I would go. Because like if it really like if you have LeBron and AD and Mitchell, like your 4th and 5th guys need to not be liabilities, but it's different than just kind of, I don't know, building like a quote unquote normal team with like 6 good players.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's either option. Well, how about this? They're going to do one of those 2 things, right? They're going to get one big guy in a trade or.
Are you sure?
Well, I just can't imagine I can't imagine holding on to those picks. It's hard with, if you got LeBron back, like, aren't you that's just always what happens when he signs an extension, however short it is. And it's like, all right, we got LeBron, start trading picks. Like that's kind of just the way things go.
The Clippers they're not a mess, and they actually have more assets than, like, they're not in the same situation as Phoenix. They could trade, like they have the salary matching that you could move and attach a first round pick. It's like, oh, they have Alex Caruso on this team all of a sudden.
Yeah.
But James Harden and Paul George are both free agents, or at least they should be, unless Paul George decides to opt in. And James Harden is coming back, but the number matters because who is coming in with an offer for James Harden?
There's just nobody. Like,
Which is wild because James Harden's still really good. It's
Yeah.
not James Harden sucks, but he is a tough fit, and you're looking at his age, the money he'll cost. Paul George is just, when Kawhi signed that extension, I just assumed, oh, Paul George will be back. He'll sign an extension soon. It'll probably be identical, and we'll move forward. It doesn't sound like that's going to be the case. And the stuff they're going to move into Inuit Dome, and so you want to have all these guys in the roster, but they also seem weirdly against giving Paul George the full boat in terms of years and salary. And I don't know what leverage they have, to be honest with you. Is it, well, look at what Kawhi signed for, because the Sixers will take that leverage and shit all over it if they need to.
They'll say, thank you for setting the bar there for us so we can beat that number. We'll take Paul George now, please. No, I hope someday we get an inside explanation of like, how mad was Paul George that Kawhi signed for those numbers, right? Because like all along it's been identical deals, like same timelines, same out years, all that stuff. And then, you know, I think that's a fair deal for Kawhi given the health risks. It might even be too much, but like the idea that Paul George like was just going to be cool with signing for the same thing is crazy to me. So I almost wonder if like they knew that those offers were on the table and Kawhi took it and Paul George didn't. And now like, what's their dynamic like? Because like, I could imagine just being mad at him if you're Paul George. Like, why did you do that? Why not hold out together? They can't let both of us leave like that. I don't know. That's a weird dynamic.
I know both of them want to be in LA, but Kawhi just seems to just want to be there, not have to deal with uprooting, even to, you know, technically at this point, go across the hall to the Lakers. Let's say that even seems like it'd be a chore for him. With Paul George, though, and it's kind of, it feels like we're boiling down their chaos factor into this one player, but he is the single best and biggest flight risk of any potential free agent. There's not a more consequential free. He's only the only consequential free agent who's likely to leave. Like, because Malik Monk leaves, okay, that sucks.
Yeah.
It's not the end of the world. But the Clippers is kind of like, you can say what you want about the way he finished the postseason. Like, Paul George is your second most important player on this team still.
Oh, easy. Yeah. And like, can't replace him. All the normal stuff you say about a free agent in this position, like can't replace him. You get markedly worse without him. And it puts so much pressure on two guys to carry heavier loads that you were not comfortable like overburdening for a number of reasons. So it's just like the ripple effects of him leaving are like massive for the Clippers.
Do you think, and there's also like, you kind of need to, I won't use the word flesh out because they do have a pretty good rotation, but like they need, like, it feels like they need something else, whether it's going to be someone with more downhill juice, a different type of, like, not the Russell Westbrook backup playmaker, or do they want someone who unlocks more of their smaller ball lineups at the 5, or do they just want a bigger guy who's a better floor spacer than Daniel Tice? And obviously Zubats and Mason Plumlee, that's not their games. So like there's stuff that they need, and they could trade a salary and a first round pick to go address one or maybe two of those things in the same deal. But like, or do you think there's a chance that we're overrating the chaos factor here to where it's, well, Paul George is probably just going to be back anyway, even if the negotiations are contentious. And then after that, it's, well, like, what are you actually worried about?
Yeah. I mean, we're only overrating it insofar as like the Clippers actually are just in control of this, right? Like it's just money. They can just pay the guys they need to keep more money than anyone else can. And then problem solved. It doesn't solve what the like secondary issues you mentioned about the rest of the rotation and roster. So maybe a little bit, but it like, I think I don't get past the Paul George being the most sought after big name out there and there being a legitimate chance he leaves and you get nothing for him. Like that's chaos. Like that's it, given the overall circumstances of how pot committed this team is, the new arena, like all of it is like that's a big disruption.
There's also, I know it's years down the line, but what if he just leaves for Philly? Like it's not an opt-in and trade or a sign and trades scenario. You think about, I know it was to get both Paul George and Kawhi Leonard, but to give up all that in theory for Paul George, and then I'm not relitigating the trade, but then the end result is you just lose Paul George for nothing like a half decade later.
Yeah.
That's like, I don't think that's been entertained enough because it does seem so far-fetched that he's actually going to leave.
Yeah.
But like, if he does, wild.
If you're Paul George, this is not germane to the topic, but I'm curious. if you're Paul George, you can choose. The money is equal. Would you rather be on the Philadelphia 76ers next year or the Clippers?
I'm going to add another one, or the Knicks.
Or the Knicks?
I think I would, honestly, would you pick the Knicks? Am I being a homer?
I think
if the trade for Paul George, because it would be an opt-in trade, they're sign and trade scenarios, but I think it'd be an opt-in trade. He would have to extend later. If you can just join the Knicks core, sans Bogdanovich and Julius Randle, let's say,
yeah,
I think it's the Knicks.
They got the highest floor of those three teams,
yes,
for sure. Like,
so the Clippers have the highest ceilings, or would Philly have the highest ceiling?
Philly has the best player, so I think, and like the clean slate, so I think they have the highest ceiling. The Clippers probably have the lowest floor and the lowest ceiling of those three teams.
Man, I don't know the way Kawhi looked when but it's just he didn't finish the season.
He always do that though. Remember how he looked until he didn't look that way?
To be fair, how often do we say that about Embiid?
Well, that's true. Same thing. So the answer clearly is the Knicks, because we have no reservations.
Yes, I found a way to make this about the Knicks.
You did it. You manifested it. It's time. We have to get to the number one team.
Which would you say there was the Cavs? Sorry, but were they, because we didn't have them in the one spot weeks ago. Like they were not a sleeper, but like they graduated to the top.
They did. Yeah. They to me, I don't think there is much of a discussion about it. I know it's within the tier, but I don't think there's another team that you could say the Cavs definitely should be behind this team. I don't think that argument is there.
No, and I framed it this way in something I recently wrote, like the level of chaos. Donovan Mitchell is a trade candidate if he signs an extension. Darius Garland, because of the way Darius Garland feels, is a trade candidate if Donovan Mitchell signs an extension. Jared Allen's a trade candidate no matter what, after they just assassinated his character in that Athletic piece. Just absolutely disgusting shit from anonymous sources. That's 3 of your top 4 players whose futures are, even, I'll use the word arguably, in flux or debatable. There's not another team in the league that you say, well, we don't know if like 3 of our 4 best players, not all 3, but like 2 of your 4 best players might just be traded or request out.
I've been talking about the juxtaposition of like chaos and control. Like the Cavs don't have control over, because Donovan Mitchell is going to set the dominoes falling one way or the other, as you laid out. And so from there, it's just, you're just reacting to like, okay, what do we have to do now? Right. Like, it's not like, just to contrast it with, say, I don't know, like Philly, it's like, they're not reacting to anything. They're just going out there with all, like, just free choice to do what you want to do within the limits of the market or whatever. But the Cavs, it's like, all right, the Mitchell thing. Okay, so if whatever happens with Mitchell, we're making a decision on Garland. We're definitely making a decision on Jared Allen. Like, and then we also don't have a coach is another cool thing to think about. And already, like, we've had 2 good enough years to where like expectations are high. Like this is a team that it's not like they can take a step back and everybody's going to be like, cool, I get it. That's not where they are. So I would you say, I'm trying to think, there's just not another situation like this, I don't think, where like it really just does. We can map out like the possibilities, but until we get a Mitchell decision and until the Cavs get a Mitchell decision, you don't really know like who's staying, who's going, what the rest of the roster is going to look like from that point on. So it's just like there's so much uncertainty, and like you don't get any certainty really in a concrete way, because depending on what happens, you're just like, okay, we either trade this guy or this guy, like one of the two. So it's such a mess.
Their saving grace is they still have some level of control because they get to negotiate trades, but you're negotiating them in almost any of the 3 cases we outlined under some sort of duress, where it's Mitchell declined an extension and probably means he's going to leave after next season, or Darius Garland requested a trade, or did you yourself just nuke Jared Allen's cap value by questioning whether he wanted to play enough because he didn't get some sort of injection to power through what was called like a pierced rib. It wasn't even like it was a pierced rib, not a bruised rib, a pierced rib. I'm fucking aggravated by that still, if you can't tell. So but is there a saving grace though you say they don't have a coach? Is there a chance that like a fresh voice comes in? We know Donovan Mitchell wants it, but is then able to sell, okay, like I can make Darius Garland and Donovan Mitchell work. So you placate them. And then all of a sudden you're dealing with, well, do we move Jared Allen, try and get a wing and just lean into the one big stuff, which that's a lot. That's still pretty high stakes, but it's very much medium stakes compared to what they're up against now. And it's also weird because even if they go the worst case route, like they still just have so many outs that we're not saying their future is fucked.
No,
The chaos factor is just through the roof.
yeah, I think you can mitigate. So like, I guess what is the most stable outcome? It's like, I guess you get Mitchell, you lock Mitchell down on a new deal, so you don't have to deal with the uncertainty about that anymore. Ideally, this new coach you're talking about convinces Garland and Mitchell, like, I got it, guys. I figured that I will show you how we'll make this work. And then you have Mobley back and you don't trade Jared Allen. So you kind of run it back. Maybe you find a way to make more upgrades in the rotation. But then it's like all of the problems that everybody has worried about with this team are still there, of like the two smalls and the two bigs. Like, how's this work? So there's almost, even the most stable scenario feels unrealistic, because just running it back, I think people would like, that's almost not an acceptable way to go. Whether that's fair or not, I don't think people will view running it back as like a confidence building scenario.
Because I might disagree.
Because, so hold on, I was just gonna say, what I guess so. Like, if you would disagree, is it because you still think that we haven't seen enough of these four guys together to totally close the book on like this roster construction working?
Yes, because look at all the injuries they dealt with this season. I don't think Mobley, I think the bigger problem will remain. I know a lot of people focus on the two small guards. I don't think Evan Mobley, we saw him expand his range. He's never going to be high volume enough from three to just make this a non-issue. So you might always end up back to the fact that he needs to be your five, but we have seen them stagger the two, even in crunch time, him and Allen, to where your roster can make sense. And so if let's keep this exact team in place. And let's just say you turn Niang and they pick number 20 into Dorian Finney-Smith. So now you've committed to, we're going to we'll play our bigs together sometimes. We're going to stagger our bigs, and our options to fill out Mitchell, Garland, plus one big are Dorian Finney-Smith, maybe Isaac Okoro. We have Max Strus in there. Sam Merrill is here. Karis LeVert is there. There's so many different levers to pull. And you've had like instances where I don't think Mitchell and Garland have ever fully coalesced, but like it's not outside the realm of possibility based off the style of both their games, especially if you're giving them more space up front. And I also believe, you were framing it specifically for running it back. But like, I still think that you could, like, Jared Allen plus first round pick or picks, because they'll technically have two to trade. Like, that could get you. It's not going to get you Mikal Bridges, I don't think, but like, who would be perfect for this team? Shocker, he's perfect for all 30 teams. So, but like, running it back is not a disastrous outcome for me, because and you've been a little bit more skeptical, I think, and justifiably so, than I have of the core to begin with. And I think they've reached the point where doing nothing is probably not the ideal scenario. And I wouldn't even frame it that way. It feels like the idea of running it back just feels implausible. Based off the factors that we already like went through.
Yeah, maybe I was too strongly. I guess part of like, yeah, if you, in your hypothetical, like, all right, like could work. I don't know how satisfied, I don't know, the ownership or the front office or fans would be with that, but because it seems so unlikely that they will just run it back, that's why they're at the top of the chaos rankings. Like, the stable path does not seem anything close to the likeliest one for this team.
Right. So yeah, I think the only team that I would consider putting in front of them at the moment is probably the Clippers, just because Paul George leaving, I think, would just be nightmarish, especially if he just leaves. Like, there's no like trade that's in there. But
I mean, if you got really wild with like Phoenix, no chance to rank above. I don't, just because they can't do anything. The Sixers kind of similarly, it's like there's not a huge downside. The Warriors, like, I don't know if they trade Draymond or something. Like,
Steph is just like, right. Clay leaves in free agency. They don't do any. They're ducking attacks, and Steph's like, fuck this. I want out.
Some seems unlikely, but I agree. Like that. If you really went to like full disaster scenario, the Warriors could get there for sure.
Yeah, I think they're the only team.
Maybe, yeah.
Because unless you think that, like, if we're gonna throw Steph in there as well, why wouldn't you throw a Giannis trade request into the equation? I get that, but they're not in tier one. So there will be no stat padding today. Who do we blame for that? Let's play. Oh, you know what? In Discord, join our Discord. Link to is in the YouTube and podcast descriptions. Austin said, I think that he enjoys our stat paddings more than the actual pods. So now we're just going to eliminate stat padding from the equation out of spite.
Yeah, this is vegetables, not dessert. So sorry, we're just gonna
Shout out Austin. I appreciate you. He has a bunch of guess-up players for you. We'll have to get to next.
I know he sent me one too. So we have some banked here. I was just gonna say I would care to have a nuanced discussion about taking us out, unless you have anything else you'd like to add.
No, I think I'm good here.
Okay, I'm good too. I'm glad you're good. Everybody, thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. If you watched and saw Dan manipulate the tier maker like a thoracic surgeon with just deft hands and drag and drops, really perfect. If you have not already, please rate, review, subscribe, thumbs up, wherever you get your podcasts. Leave comments on the YouTube videos that Dan so diligently posts. Check out our shorts. We're messing around with new formats. Look out. So
full torso
shots. Anything beyond that,
Grant's
behind the paywall.
They're looking massive. Grant's delts are looking just absolutely yoked at the moment.
Yeah, it's illegal. It should be. Let's see. What else did I say? Dan already mentioned the way to join our Discord. The links for that in YouTube and podcast description. Same way you can get some merch. I think that's going to do it. Shouts, Frank Ntilikina. Apologies, Jared Allen.